Fuel pumps, fuel pumps. Pick a fuel pump. Which one's OEM? Which one's aftermarket? Which one will last? Which one's going to leave you stranded, maybe on the side of the highway somewhere? Well, in case you've got a workhorse chassis and you've decided or confirmed that your fuel pump has failed and you need to get a new one, you need to be careful what you order and be aware that there are some sellers out there who will tell you you're buying a workhorse fuel pump when in fact you're not getting a workhorse fuel pump. I've heard from people where they've bought fuel pumps, go to all the trouble and expense of getting them installed because we've got to drop these big heavy fuel tanks and get it done and put it back in, just to have it fail a month, 2 months later. So we don't want that to happen. We only want to do this job one time. But I want to point out something to you, how easily it can be. You can be duped into thinking you're getting a factory pump when you're not. So let me go to the house and I'll show you exactly what I mean. Then we'll come back here and start taking these fuel pumps apart and dissecting them. Okay, we're back in the house. So here's a scenario. So you've decided you need a new fuel pump. Of course, like everybody else, you're going to get on the internet and do some searching. You're going to search maybe Workhorse W24 fuel pump 2005, and you're going to land on a page like this. And you're going to look at this page. You say, well, look at here. There's the part number. There's a description. There's a Workhorse logo. And you see that price. And you do some more Googling. And you may come, this is a place called Wheeler Solutions. Then you do some Googling and you come across Brazos. And you see, well, wait a minute, it's $537. So you go back to, because this is Brazos' website that I buy all my stuff from. So then you go back to here, Wheeler, and you think, well, heck, fire. They must have them on sale. This is a bargain. And you look at the picture. They're even using a picture of an OEM fuel pump. But when you get the product, open up the box, that's not what you're going to receive. You're going to receive a cheap aftermarket. Now, Brazos, they even offer an aftermarket pump. In a pinch, sometimes we get into situations to where our OEM pumps are on back order. We can't get them. So in that situation, well, when that happens, then they do offer an aftermarket version. And right here it is. But you'll notice they tell you in the description, this is a brand new aftermarket fuel pump. So they tell you up front, it is aftermarket. But they'll even tell you that, it's not near as good as the OEM, and they do have problems with them. In fact, the aftermarket pump I have sitting in my garage that we're fixing to take apart and dissect is one that Brazos sold, and it failed on the customer. So that's how we know these aftermarket pumps are just not holding up. So let me tell you how I came about this story and how I found out this was happening. Another one of my YouTube subscribers reached out to me that his fuel pump was bad and that he found one, and he was telling me about his install and stuff. So let's go to this screen. So he was telling about he got it. He got the fuel pump. And I asked him, I said, well, how much did you pay for that fuel pump? And he said, $333. I said, really? And it's a genuine OEM fuel pump. He said, yep, because he bought it right here, and he looked at that description. Yep, that's brand new OEM fuel pump. So then I asked him, I said, you still got the box? He said, yeah. I said, well, could you send me a picture of the box that came in? So he did. So here's the picture. Whoops, go to this screen. So I looked at that picture and I noticed, because we had this sticker here. That's the original sticker. But then there's a sticker over top of a sticker. So I asked him, I said, and then you see the W, because the W stands for Wheeler Fleet Solutions. But you might think that maybe it means for Workhorse when it doesn't. So then I seen this other sticker. I said, would you do me a favor, take a hairdryer, heat this sticker up and peel it off and tell me what you find. So he did that, and I'll show you what we found then. So when he peeled it off, we got this. See, there's this, when you peel that sticker off, we find out it's a TU467-2, which is a Walbro fuel pump. This is not, I think Delphi is the one who makes this pump for Workhorse. And don't think you can just order this pump from Delphi, because it doesn't exist. It's made specifically to Workhorse specifications. And when I take it apart here in a minute, you'll see the differences. The motor's different, bigger size. There's quite a few differences. So he got duped, unfortunately, and probably a lot of people do. That's pretty sad, and they need to correct this. Hopefully, they'll see this video and they will, because I got a website from in my real world. What I do, I got it on a lawnmower shop, and here's our little website. This thing's been running for 13, 14 years. It's old, but it still works. So just an example, we also sell fuel pumps. So this is a fuel pump that fits a Briggs & Stratton engine. But you'll notice in our description, it plainly says replaces the following part numbers. Briggs & Stratton, blah, blah, blah. So we're up front with people. Look, this is not an OEM factory Briggs & Stratton fuel pump. This is aftermarket because it replaces these numbers along with John Deere, Kohler, all these other. If you want to buy a lawnmower part, there's a website, mymowerparts.com. I think we could save you some money, but they're not doing it. See what they're doing here? That needs to be corrected. This should say, pump, fuel, workhorse, parts, whatever, but it should say in bold letter replaces this part number. So then you'd maybe have a clue. So, okay, this is not OEM then. This is an aftermarket fuel pump. So then you can decide what you want to do. But I'm telling you, it ain't worth the headache and the trouble putting in an aftermarket fuel pump just to have it. You just imagine what a bad day that's going to be. You put an aftermarket fuel pump, you save a couple $100, but you're going on a trip somewhere and then it just quits on you when you're on the side of the interstate, broken down, and it's 100 degrees, and you're waiting on a tow truck, and it's going to cost you another $1,500 to $2,000 to get that fuel pump replaced. I've heard people, that's what they have to pay as far as labor. Time you pay a tow bill and labor, it's just astronomical. And like what I'm doing right now, I'm replacing my fuel pump we got a little over 70,000 miles. So my fuel pump has not failed, but I'm going to go ahead and replace it now because I'm talking to a lot of, the nice thing about having my YouTube channel, I kind of get an early warning where I talk to people and help them on the repairs. I start finding trends, and I always ask people, how many miles you got on your RV when this part failed? Just like fan clutches. Our fan clutches are failing between 70 and 90,000 miles. That seems to be consistent. These fuel pumps the same way, 70, 80,000 miles, they're starting to fail on people. So kind of, and another product that was on the HWH hydraulic pump, the electric motor, the 12 volt motor powers the hydraulics. The brushes are starting to wear out, and they just stop suddenly. And so I started getting calls, and sure enough, I took mine apart, and my brushes were almost wore out. So it kind of helps me and helps you too, as I can report the stuff that people are reporting to me. But what else I want to show you? Got a few pictures here that he sent. Well, because I got this pump down here, I'll show you up close. He was just showing me the differences between the aftermarket but one thing was kind of interesting he did is check this out. Now he has a 38J Winnebago 38J floor plan, and he was able to put his fuel pump in by cutting a hole. Well, get in the right spot here. So he cut a hole in his basement storage area to gain access to the fuel pump. Let's see. There's another picture. And then he made a little door, a little cover to put it all back nice and clean. That was his solution to changing his fuel pump. I opted to go ahead and drop the tank because I also wanted to, make you a thorough video of it, and I wanted to also change out my fuel line that goes to the Onan generator because it's also 18 years old and is going to start dry rotting and cracking, and that'll cause trouble in the future. So I'll be replacing all that too in the following video. So that's where we are. Oh, there's one last thing, I guess, to point out, just to show you. He even sent me a copy of his receipt. That's where he bought it. It plainly says right there's the part number, fuel pump assembly. Nothing about aftermarket. Nothing stating this is actually a Walbro fuel pump, not a Delphi fuel pump. And there was the price. Delivered $356. I see they've even dropped the price now, but I'm telling you, don't take a chance to get an aftermarket pump. All right, so I guess I got all that explained, long-winded as I am. Let's go down to the garage and take some fuel pumps apart. All right, back in the garage. So here we go. This is the aftermarket fuel pump that I don't like. This is my original fuel pump that served me well for 18 years. Still works, but she's getting replaced. This here's a brand new one we got from Brazzers. One thing about anything you get from Brazzers, it's always packed very well. I never got anything damaged from them. So there's a brand new one, and looks almost virtually identical. They've added some pieces here for whatever reason, but we'll dig into that a little bit more. One other thing I wanted to point out, this fuel pump. When I first got this RV, 10 or 11 years ago, first thing I did, I got on the RV2 forum and started doing research on any repairs and failures about the W24, the 8.1 Vortec engine, anything to do with the 38J floor plan, anything peculiar. Try to read anything I could to find out the most common problems, so I knew what I needed to be prepared for. And I remember one thing that stuck out in my mind, one of the worst breakdowns I guess you could have would be a bad fuel pump. I mean, alternators you can change on the side of the road. Water pumps, yeah, I can do that too if I had to. You can something you could readily get and take care of yourself. But now if a fuel pump goes bad, people were reporting, years ago it was costing them $1,500. Time you get towed somewhere and they drain the fuel, you order a pump, get it put in. Most likely they're going to put in a cheap aftermarket pump anyways. They're not going to take the time to get a good OEM workhorse pump. So anyway, I come up with this little kit, and this is not a permanent solution. This is just a temporary solution. I got this design. I got a video. This is an older video. If you go to my YouTube channel, just type in fuel pump, you'll find it, and I show you exactly step by step how to make this. So even if my new fuel pump, heaven forbid, years down the road, it fails on me, I will always keep this on board. So within 15 minutes, I can plumb this up and be back on the road, and until I get to a campground, regroup, and change the fuel pump at my leisure. So anyway, so that's what that's all about. Pretty good thing. I've carried it around for years. Luckily I never needed it, but I made it for about $100, so it's cheap insurance policy. All right, so now let's do some comparison between the aftermarket and the OEM fuel pump. So let me get my tripod for this. Okay, tripod's in place. Let's see if we can do this. All right, so got the Walbro. I think this is a Walbro fuel pump aftermarket. First of all, I don't like it's because it doesn't come with a factory connector. You have to, they have an extra harness you got to clip into this, so it will adapt to fit this. And of course, that means another connection and another point of failure possibility with a loose connection. Don't like that. Another thing I noticed right off the bat is the float is not as big. The OEM float is larger than the aftermarket. I've seen that. Another thing is our fuel pump, our fuel pressure regulator is built into the tank. Now, with the aftermarket, the fuel pressure regulator is up really high out of the fuel, where it's going to probably get a whole lot hotter, I'm assuming, because the fuel acts as a coolant. Where our OEM pump, our fuel pressure regulator, is right here at the bottom. So it's going to stay mostly submerged. So maybe that'll help a little bit longevity. There's a reason why they put it down there, so maybe that's what that's for. I'm just guessing, but I like that a little bit better. Oh, and also just to mention to you, in 2004 and newer, we have the fuel pressure regulator is built into the fuel pump, into the fuel tank, and this is what it is. Up on our fuel rail on the driver's side, you will see a device on there on the fuel rail, and you may think it is a fuel pressure regulator. It is not. That is a fuel dampener. Now, if you have a 2003 and earlier, you will have a fuel pressure regulator on the fuel rail. One way you can tell for certain is you will have a vacuum line going to it, and it uses a different pump. This style pump goes in anything 2004 and newer, just so you know, FYI. Something else, at a glance I can tell the pump is larger. I'm gonna take this part and get it a little bit deeper, but I can tell the diameter of the fuel pump is not the same. So that's going to be a big weak point, I would assume. What else we want to talk? Oh, I noticed our Evap canisters. We got 3 connections here. So we got your outlet, going to the filter, and then you got your return, but then you also got your vent line that goes to your Evap canisters or charcoal canisters that sit up underneath the frame. Well, with this design, the OEM, it actually has a check valve here. So if fuel, when you get a completely full tank of gas, it checks it off. So raw fuel cannot be pushed into those canisters. The aftermarket does not have that. That's where they've saved some more money. See, you look down here, it's a direct connection. So say for instance, you fill your fuel tank up on a cool evening. You pull into a truck stop, you fill your tank up, and then go park and sleep for the night. And the next day it gets really hot and it warms up. That fuel is going to expand. If it's going to go somewhere, it's going to easily push out this line and fill fuel up into your Evap canisters. That's probably a problem we want to avoid. So I did notice that. You can hear that little check ball in there. So that's another benefit. So what else we got? Well, I'm going to do a test on these little resistors, see how that works, or the resistance for your our gauge on the dash. All right, what else can we do? All right. Oh, I was going to point out to you. The reason I got this pump is because this was a return pump. This is one that Brazil sold. Like I said, they do offer aftermarkets for, sometimes we get in situations where you can't get the OEM pumps because they're on back order. So I would suggest, like I think I may have mentioned it before, if you got 70,000 miles or more, for an insurance policy, go ahead and pick you up an OEM pump. If you don't want to change it now, at least have it in your RV with you. And if it does fail on you, at least you've got the pump. Any garage can change it for you. If you don't have the abilities and don't want to tackle it yourself. But you can watch my video and you can do it yourself. So that may help. But here's a letter from the what happened to it. Brazil sent me this letter. The customer, he had a 2005 Workhorse W22 8.1 Vortec. Installed it on 3/27 of 22. That was this year. 62,600 miles. Failed on 5/16 at 63,684 miles. So he didn't get very many miles on it all. And then the pump failed in Phoenix on May the 16th. The driving temperatures were 110 degrees. Did not blow a fuse. Just quit working. So what I did, you see this distorted jug here. So I was experimenting with this thing. Let me get this off here. So what I did, I had this sitting down in this jug, and then I did this all outside. So I filled it with gasoline, I hooked my long wires to it, to a battery, and let it run. And I let it, and it would run, but I noticed I just let it run while I was in the garage doing other stuff, and I could hear it changing tune, like would speed up and slow down, speed up and slow down. So there's something squirrely going on with this pump. So it was amazing how hot it got. I mean, the heat, you can see how it distorted this plastic container because it was crazy, the heat. And I guess it's just the nature of the beast with those little pumps. They're so powerful and they spin so fast, they generate a lot of heat. So next thing I want to do, I want to try to get this apart and compare this pump to my old pump over here. So let me get some tools and reset here. Okay, a little bit of test. I was taking this apart, and I noticed it's got like a filter and a filter. You got that filter. When you take this cap off, then you got another filter. So I was trying to figure out its flow. It's kind of how it works. So the only way I can tell is actually this is actually number 2 fuel oil. So I'm not using gasoline, so I'm less likely to blow myself up. So let's put a little juice to it, see what happens. All right. So you see what it's doing, it's pumping up the hose here, coming out, going right back in. But also while it's pumping, it's always squirting out the bottom too. So it sucks from the bottom, shoots out the side. So I'm going to pinch this off. Let me get some pliers. Okay, so when I pinch this off, you'll see the flow increases. That's full flow. Just pinching it off. So, alright. Turn this off. So I guess in order for this fuel pump to protect itself, it has to be flowing fuel through it constantly, regardless of our flow at the injectors. If we're wide open throttle or if we're at idle, there's not much fuel going through at times, that more so than others. So this way there's fluid always circulating through. So it was kind of interesting. All right, let me do a little more tinkering. All right, I'm learning more about how this is working. So actually, if you blow through this, it comes out. This pipe and this pipe is connected. All the fuel that gets sucked into the pump is coming through these little slotted areas there. Right, come here. Right here along the outer edge. That's where it gets sucked up into the pump, builds up pressure. So what I was thinking, that's why it looked weird to me, because this is so narrow. Actually, this is fuel getting pushed back. The filter is actually, this is the main filter. All the fuel enters through this filter. If I can line it up back to, there it goes. So actually this is our filter sock that pulls in. And I believe this is kind of like an exhaust filter. So the fuel that gets blown out goes through this. That kind of makes more sense to me, because I couldn't understand why they'd make it the suction filter, because it would be pinched off. So now that makes sense to me. So this is your main filter. But one thing I noticed, for what little runtime it had, what, a little over 1,000 miles, it does look a little cruddy in there. So that's kind of strange. All right, so now we've got that dissected. Let's take apart the OEM and do a little comparison. Well, I found something else interesting as I was dissecting stuff. I got to look into these wires and they look smaller. So I thought, well, let me confirm that. I got my calipers out. And so this is the aftermarket pump here. These are the wires that feed the sending unit for the gas gauge. So it's 51 thousandths. All right, let's check the sending unit wires on the OEM pump. 67 thousandths, bigger wire. All right, now what about the wires that actually power the motor itself? So we're at 79 thousandths on the aftermarket. The OEM wires come in at 86. Cool. Yeah. So that's another reason to go OEM, not aftermarket. So what else was I going to dissect? I'll find something else to take apart. So here's another quick test just to show you the difference between an OEM fuel pump and an aftermarket fuel pump. See here, we got an aftermarket fuel pump. This fits the Workhorse chassis. So our aftermarket fuel pump, if I can get it to balance. Come on, balance for me. It was balancing a while ago. It don't. Oh, my bull butter. Okay, there it is. So we got 1 pound, 15.9 ounces. So a little less than 2 pounds. All right, so let's take that off. Now, fresh from Brazel's RV, got a brand new OEM fuel pump. Now you can see at first glance, they look very similar, virtually identical. You look at the top and everything. But now let's look at the weight. Okay, so this comes in at 2 pounds, 9.4 ounces. So there's almost 1 pound difference. But to look at them, they look virtually identical. But you can tell there's a lot more to it with your OEM fuel pumps. And so I'm going to dig into it a little bit deeper, and I'll show you what else I can find about it. What's creating this extra weight. Check out this experiment. This is my old pump, the one I'm replacing just because it's old. And I've got it hooked up just like it would be in the RV, where it loops back, and then your regulator is maintaining the pressure of 61 psi. So remember, you can't compress the fluid. It's always got to move. It's got to go somewhere. That's why we have that regulator. But check out the temperature in this thing. Look at that. That's 129 degrees, and it hasn't been running 5 minutes. So that's why they tell you not to run your fuel tank so low, because it really gets extremely hot. And I'm assuming it may shorten the life of those pumps. But man, those pumps, they really get hot. It's 128 degrees on the side of that pump. Of course, it's not completely submerged, because it wouldn't be as you're running out of fuel. You run out of fuel, that little pump's going to get hotter and hotter and shorten its life. So my curiosity was getting to me. I was wondering what is happening with our fuel pump when it's in the fuel tank. How does it all work? So I'm simulating our see-through fuel tank. And this is our brand new pump. I'm going to fire it up for the first time. and I've submerged it. But this is kind of neat. Notice when I lift it up, the fuel stays in the canister. It doesn't drain out because there's a check valve there. And hang on, I got to get two hands. There it goes. It's hanging up on me. But there's a check valve that allows the fluid to fill up, but it won't drain out. Of course, I understand that makes sense. So if you're driving down the road and maybe you only got 1 inch of fuel in the fuel tank, and then you're going up a steep hill, all the fuel is going to rush back to the back. But this fuel will remain in that canister. Of course, remember, while it's running, it's always filling itself back up. I'll show you that here just when I get it plugged up. There we go. And here's that check valve I was telling you about, because this is my old one I dissected. And so that's what allows the fuel to come in but won't drain back out. Now I'm going to turn it on, and you're going to notice as soon as I turn it on, it's going to fill up to the top and start overflowing. Because that way, no matter how much fuel we have in the tank, even if we're down just a ½ an inch, the fuel pump itself will always stay submerged until you absolutely run out of fuel at the last minute to help keep it cool. So I've got my 12 volts powered up here. I got my little diagram so I know which pin is negative, which pin is positive. Got that done, so let's fire it up. Come on, Mr. Battery. Okay, there we go. So as you're driving down the road, that's what's happening all the time, constantly. So because here's our fuel pump. It comes up this line. It comes up. It goes out to our fuel filter. Remember, our fuel filter is just outside the fuel tank on the fuel rail. It loops back and comes right back into the canister. It comes in to the, actually it comes right down here into our fuel regulator. And our fuel regulator's got a spring in there, and that maintains our 61 PSI. And you can see how it does. It just does that all day long. I do notice this seems to be a whole lot quieter than my old one was. It seemed to be much louder. Of course, it had 18 years on it, 70,000 miles. But I found that kind of interesting. So next thing we're going to do, I'm going to show you, we're going to talk about the fuel path, exactly how the fuel makes it from the tank up to the engine. All right, let's see if we can't follow the path of fuel. So here's a little container cup here, that's this part. As soon as it gets submerged into the tank, the fuel will creep past this check valve, and it's going to come up. And then the next path it takes, it goes through our little sock filter. In fact, I cut mine open after 18 years. It actually looked pretty good. There's nothing in there. So you can see a little bit of, but it's nothing that comes off. I just don't know if it's dirt, stain, maybe it's some dirt deep inside. But I figured after 18 years that looks pretty good. Of course, then it goes through a sock filter. We've got the little part right there that snaps up into the bottom of the pump itself, a little hole. And it gets sucked up through the fuel pump, up through this line, comes out the nipple on the fuel, on the top of the fuel tank, goes to our fuel filter. Remember, our fuel filter has 3 ports on it. You got the one that, you know, from the tank, you got the one that goes to the engine itself, and then the one that comes back to the fuel tank. So it loops around, it gets filtered, it loops around, comes right back down into our fuel pump. And it comes down this hose, and this is when it hits our fuel regulator. So we got a spring in here that's set at 61 PSI. So it holds back until it sees 61 PSI, then it releases and allows it to bypass and go through. Because see, like imagine if you was to cut the hose right here, we'd lose pressure. We wouldn't have no 61 PSI. So that's a pretty cool thing how that works. And then, because I had to break all this off to get it apart, because another thing I noticed how the aftermarket pump came apart relatively easy. This one did not, because this component is like, I guess it's sonically welded. There's just no way it did not come apart at all without breaking it. So this part squirts the gas back down into the bottom, and then it's kind of strange, but it comes down. It has this little connector here, and all it does, it comes in, hits that connector, and then shoots right back up and squirts out the top of this piece, but you can't see it because it's covered up here. But it does that because it's always keeping this chamber full of fuel constantly. So that way our fuel pump stays submerged, and then it just repeats the cycle over and over. So of course that's why that fuel can get so hot too. It's picking up the heat from the pump itself and just gets recycled over and over again. So I thought that was kind of interesting, and let's dig a little bit deeper. Well, remember when I put the fuel pumps on the scale, I think I found a 1 pound difference. Here's the fuel pump out of the OEM. Here's the fuel pump out of the aftermarket. This thing's like a brick, big old heavy thing. This, not so much. Let's put a caliper on it. What's this come in at? 1.94, almost 2 inches across. 1.54. So there you go. So I think that makes the choice pretty easy, doesn't it? What do you want to have in your RV? You want to have a heavy duty pump like this, or you want to have something like that? And you know, unless you take something apart like this, you'll never know. And the one thing I don't understand why, because now this is made by Delphi, and I'm assuming this aftermarket, this looks like a Walbro. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe it is. I know there's a couple different companies who make aftermarket pumps, but this is why you need to be leery of them. Was the reason why there's a couple $100 difference in them. But you would think companies like Delphi would do just what I did, spend 2 hours on the bench, tear one apart, and show the differences. Think how many more pumps they could sell that way. But I guess another reason, I'm wondering why, because the Workhorse, this is kind of spec'd. The Delphi makes it for Workhorse, but you can't buy a Delphi pump that will fit our Workhorse. We got to get these through Workhorse. And I guess they're built by their specifications. So I'm wondering, I was thinking about how we use an RV. You know, they sit and they do nothing, but then we fire them up and we drive. You know, like for me, when I take off to Florida, I'll be driving straight for 12 hours. Even when I fill up with gas, I leave the engine running. So this pump is running, you know, and getting extremely hot, a 12-hour run. So what would you trust more, this big heavy duty pump for 12 hours or this little thing? So I think the choice is easy. Okay, another component. I really don't know what this is actually called. It's a check valve. I know what it does. It prevents the fuel from getting into our evap tanks, those charcoal canister tanks that we have up underneath the frame. Unlike with the aftermarket pump, there is no check valve. It's a straight shot. There's no check valve whatsoever. So if you got a full tank and you get a hot day and it expands, it's going to shoot itself right up into the evap canisters possibly. Where with the OEM part, our fuel pump, there's a little bitty spring, and there's your little float mechanism, and then there's a little check valve. So if we get an absolute full tank of fuel, it will come up and seal. There's a little bitty hole right there. It seals it off. But under normal conditions, it'll be the other way. Normal conditions, it'll be like that, and the valve will be open. And then that way the tank can breathe. The pressure can get relieved, and I guess it gets up into the evap tanks, and it gets reburned through the engine. So there's another reason why these things are over $500. There's a lot going on, a lot of components. So and that's why they cheap out on the aftermarket ones and leave that stuff out. Okay, so while I got this apart, I thought another interesting test would be to test the resistance of the fuel gauge part of the fuel pump. So I've got my little cheat sheet here. It tells me what pin is what. So it's the two center pins on top of the fuel pump right here. Two center pins. That's what you want to connect to if you want to do this test. And of course, this is telling you the positive and negative as far as going back to the cluster, but we're not worried about that because we're just measuring resistance. There's no power to it at all, but it does tell us what we're looking for. So on resistance on a empty tank, looking at 40 ohms of resistance, and full 250. So you see how this works. You just move it up and down. The float would normally be hooked to it. So right there would be an empty tank. We're at 40.7. What did it say? 40. So we're right on the money. After 18 years, I think that's pretty good. Now if we have a full tank of gas, we fill it all the way up. You can see it climb. There we go for 248.1. What it says spec is 250 plus or minus 3.3. So we're on spec on both. So you can imagine after 18 years how much that thing's bounced back and forth, bounced and held up that long. Pretty impressive. Now, I don't know, would this aftermarket pump last that long? Well, actually, let's test that. Let's see if it falls in the same range of resistance. Let me hook that up. Okay, so as a test on the aftermarket one, it's at least it's within spec. So there's be an empty tank. We're at 3 to 9.9. Take it all the way up to a full tank. We're at 250. So at least I did a good job on that. But will it last 18 years? I don't know. But look at the solder. Look at the little dabs of solder on that one compared to the big pieces of solder on the OEM. Yeah, the more I look, the more I keep seeing all kinds of better quality things about this. But I don't think there's anything left I can talk about on this thing. I've dissected it all and figured out everything I can figure out about it. So, of course, my next step is to put this new pump in an RV, get that done. But it did dawn on me, there's probably people out there just watch this video and they're thinking, oh crap, I just put one of these cheap pumps in mine last year. And you're thinking, well, now what are you going to do? You're going to leave it in? You're going to trust it? If you're going off to Alaska, would you trust this little pump here in your RV? Or would you rather have that? So, you know, you can always still get you an OEM pump well, OEM pump here when it's fully assembled. Carry it with you in case your aftermarket pump failed, but you still got to deal with changing it out yourself, which you can do. It's doable by yourself. And I'll show you how. Well, another option would be is to build you a little pump kit I made like this. It's on my YouTube channel. I think it's called WorkHorse Fuel Bypass Kit. And you'll find it. I made this thing probably 10 years ago. Never needed it, luckily. But this, in a pinch, within about 15 minutes, you can plumb it up and get yourself back on the road. Not a permanent solution, but at least get you down the road if your fuel pump fails. Get you to a campground or a shop where they can in turn install a good pump. So just something to keep in mind if your RV's pushing 70,000 or so. I'm getting more and more phone calls all the time with fuel pumps failing at that age. And so something to think about. Anyhow, thanks for watching and have yourself a blessed day. See you, bye.